December 17, 1944. The clock has just ticked past midnight amid the icy woodlands of Belgium. A fierce snowfall blankets the slender paths of the Ardennes beneath heavy layers of white. One lone army vehicle rumbles onward through the gale, its motor laboring over every frosty stretch. In the driver's seat, a soldier clutches the wheel with such force that his fingers blanch. The wipers on his glass beat steadily, fighting a losing battle against the raging snowstorm. He's disoriented. Deep in hostile territory, maybe, rendering his chart worthless at this point. Torn along the borders, drenched in perspiration, caked with grime. Markers along the way have vanished or been mangled. Orders demand complete radio blackout. His squad remains unaware of his position, and he can't pinpoint where the combat zone truly starts or finishes. Yet, tucked in the rear of his transport is cargo worth far more than riches. Countless barrels of premium aviation gasoline, petrol destined for U.S. Armored vehicles, transports, and cannons teetering on the brink of failure. Supplies for troops who are freezing, trapped, and almost fresh out of choices. What escapes this driver's notice is the following. Should he head back at this moment, exhaust his own reserves, or fall into enemy hands, the Nazi forces, indeed, the final frantic thrust from Hitler's top armored divisions, might shatter the Allied defenses. Should that occur, the European conflict might shift dramatically. The course of events might alter entirely. Yet, remarkably, defying every expectation, this misguided route, this solitary individual's error, would emerge as the pivotal moment in one of the fiercest clashes of the Second World War. And what he transports won't merely revive machines, it will rekindle spirits. This is the overlooked tale of an ordinary fellow never destined for glory. A hauler who veered off course yet delivered the essential supply to the precise spot at the perfect instant. The fight ignites. Hitler's final wager unfolds in the Ardennes, a rugged expanse of woodlands, elevations, streams, and frozen gullies straddling the frontiers of Belgium and Luxembourg. For much of the conflict, this area stayed subdued, deemed too tangled for heavy machinery, too harsh for extended operations. Precisely the reason Adolf Hitler selected it. On December 16, 1944, shrouded in night and flakes, more than 200,000 Wehrmacht soldiers burst from the foliage. They advanced with over 1,000 panzers and tracked units in support. Their aim, to breach the coalition's barrier, dash toward the Belgian harbor of Antwerp, and divide the U.S. and U.K. armies. Success, they figured, could compel negotiations along the Western Theater and perhaps reverse the conflict's momentum. This assault would later gain fame as the Battle of the Bulge. But the raw scale wasn't the only factor instilling dread in this assault. It was the velocity. The Wehrmacht intended a swift blow before the coalition could rally. They banked on stealth, shock, and petroleum. Their mechanized spearheads carried just sufficient diesel for a brief blistering surge. Delay or depletion would leave them immobilized, a vulnerability they fully grasped. Among the Americans, alarm spread swiftly along the defenses. Whole outfits found themselves blindsided, signal networks frayed, hamlets fell swiftly, the already treacherous icebound lanes jammed with fleeing locals and frantic retreats. Amid the turmoil, a fresh crisis arose. The coalition's own petroleum reserves were dwindling fast. In prior weeks, the swift advance across France had overextended their logistics. Haulers faltered, fuel caches lay dispersed and inadequately guarded. The distribution network, the vital pulse for each vehicle and gun, faced imminent breakdown. Fuel underpinned every M4 Sherman, every utility car, every field gun, gasoline above all. Beyond bravery, beyond ordnance, beyond command, it was fuel. Lacking it, even the mightiest force on earth could grind to a halt. Thus, as Axis units zeroed in on coalition storage sites, seizing or torching them, alarm morphed into stagnation. Accounts circulated of whole companies immobilized, their armor inert, their weapons mute, simply because the tankers with their vital fuel failed to show. That's where our narrative kicks off. Not amid the vanguard, but well to the rear, with a fellow in a tarpaulin-draped rig hauling solely petrol and determination via tempest, disarray, and thoroughfares others shunned. And his survival or demise, his arrival or eternal wandering, would sway the result of the biggest engagement ever waged by the American forces. The hauler, who shouldn't have been present, he went by John Miller. Folks knew him as Jack. He wasn't any legend, not in his estimation. He served as a transport operator, one among myriad souls tasked with shuttling petrol, rations, and shells over the slushy continental byways. Jack was 31. In peacetime, he'd pumped gas at a station in Pennsylvania. He grasped machinery's rumble more instinctively than most sensed their pulse. He could diagnose a rig's thirst for lubricant or a fouled intake by its startup sputter alone. Enlisting placed that expertise in the vehicle convoy branch, the overload, the essential force behind the Allies' push forward. Come December 1944, Jack had been hauling loads almost without pause for months on end. From the beaches of Normandy to the Siegfried Line, he'd transported drums of petroleum over shattered spans and past hamlets reduced to rubble. He'd witnessed scorched armored vehicles, plumes of fire rising in the distance, and the desperate expressions of locals left without shelter. Yet despite it all, he continued onward. That was his duty. Petroleum equaled survival. Each barrel that arrived at the lines could power an extra vehicle, arm another weapon, or potentially spare a soldier's life. Thus, when Jack got the directive that frigid December dawn to transport a complete shipment of premium fuel to an armored unit close to the village of Stavelot, he didn't waver. He inspected his wheels. He wiped down his glass. He wrapped his muffler securely around his throat, aware of the Ardennes' biting gusts. Then he hoisted himself into the cab, twisted the ignition, and heard the motor burst to life with a deep growl. The route was meant to be straightforward. A 3-hour journey, 2 stops for verification, 1 drop-off. But warfare rarely follows blueprints. The enemy assault had already plunged the area into disorder. Markers were absent or tampered with by hostile infiltrators posing as GIs. Communications were disrupted, and outdated charts from prior weeks bore little resemblance to the current landscape. Jack was unaware that his destination was already facing assault. Nevertheless, commands must be followed. He engaged the transmission. The vehicle lurched ahead, and before long, the steady rhythm of rubber against icy pavement drowned out everything else. Flurries lashed at his glass like shards of ice. He passed fellow transports, some charred hulks, others forsaken. The woodland's hush was pierced solely by far-off booms, muffled, relentless, unending. At intervals, he'd halt to verify his position, but familiar features had vanished. Timber splintered, dwellings in flames, and indicators meant to guide him to Stavelot now led nowhere. Even so, Jack forged ahead, for out in that void, troops depended on this cargo. Fighters who trusted reinforcements were en route, and while his rig functioned and his pulse beat strong, Jack Miller vowed to deliver it. He couldn't foresee it, but his upcoming choice, a single misstep in direction, would etch him into the annals of time. The erroneous path. Initially, the lane appeared recognizable. Jack knew the Belgian terrain well enough to distinguish a rutted side trail from a primary logistics corridor. But this felt wrong. Branches crowded in too tightly, bends arrived too abruptly, and most troubling, no other traffic had appeared in close to 20 minutes. He kept going. The blizzard intensified, heavy crystals dancing like mist over his view. His blades scraped harshly with each sweep. He peered intently, hunching over the dash, searching the gloom for some clue, a marker, a beacon, anything confirming his course. Zilch. The woods devoured it all. No structures, no barriers. No barriers suggested no fields. No fields indicated he'd veered far from the central flow of coalition traffic. Jack eased off the accelerator. His grip clenched the steering. He considered reversing, but doubt gnawed at him. He glanced at the tank level, still brimming, though not indefinitely. This beast consumed fuel like a destroyer at sea, and stranded in this whiteout, depleted of gas, amounted to a suicide note. He veered to the curb by a curve and stepped out into the drifts. The chill pierced his mittens. He spread out a fabric chart and propped it on the grill, running his digit along the inked paths, lanes, settlements, streams, attempting to align them with his surroundings. But reality struck like a gut blow. This track didn't appear on the sheet. He lingered, gazing at that barren, frost-blanketed track as dread seeped into his core. He was adrift, and more alarmingly, perhaps within foe-held ground. Jack pivoted, surveyed the tree line, then methodically circled to the rear of the rig. He rested a covered palm against the canister's flank. It pulsed with warmth, vital. Tons of premium petrol rested right beyond that metal barrier. He carried precisely what the foe desperately lacked. Should they spot him, should even one reconnaissance team chance upon this isolated hauler, capture wasn't an option. He'd become an inferno. Jack shut his eyes briefly. Flakes dusted his eyelids. In that quiet, his thoughts raced unchecked. Was this an ambush route? Had saboteurs from the enemy altered the guides to divert supply lines? He'd caught wind of tales about foes in U.S. garb, flipping pointers, spreading misinformation. He'd witnessed a trooper executed for a faulty code at a post only days prior. He clambered back aboard, shut the panel firmly, and fired the starter. The power plant coughed, then thundered, revived with purpose. That noise sparked a spark of bravery in him, not a lot, but sufficient. He faced a choice: remain parked and pray for rescue, reverse course and gamble on a path that could already be overrun, or press on solo into the unfamiliar. He rapped the dash twice. "Hang in there, old girl," he murmured. "We've got more to do." With those words, he engaged the transmission and eased ahead along an unmarked route toward an invisible destination, hauling a load that could spark chaos if it fell into hostile grasp. In his wake, the tire impressions faded beneath new snowfall. Up front, the forest grew denser. Gusts intensified, darkness deepened and hung heavy. He navigated amid quiet. The path constricted. Branches loomed nearer. Twisted limbs arched into a canopy above. Jack cut the beams. Visibility was a luxury he couldn't risk. Not at this moment. He guided by instinct, one palm on the steering, the other clutching a dim red-filtered torch that scarcely cut through the whirling flakes before him. Quietude enveloped everything. No chatter, no wildlife calls, no shots cracking, not even breezes howling. It was that oppressive hush where your own breathing echoed like thunder, where isolation bred the sense of unseen eyes. Jack's pulse hammered against his ribs. He hunched over the dash once more, eyes straining through the glass, hunting for unnatural forms. Then, motion. Distant, a brief glow. He silenced the motor. Stillness crashed over him like surf. He perched in the driver's seat, immobile, not from frost but from strategy. Too remote for clarity, yet near enough to sense authenticity. Perhaps a fire pit, maybe a hanging lamp, possibly foes huddled by flames, jesting in their tongue, or allies, stragglers, a forward post, the fringe of support. Jack delved into the compartment and withdrew his holstered revolver, a regulation Colt sidearm, untested in battle till now. He lingered a full minute, then another. Zilch. The gleam extinguished. He held out further, digits stiffening on the handle. Then, from afar, perhaps leagues away, the deep, distinct rumble of machinery, followed by more, those ponderous diesel beasts, indistinct in origin but amplifying. Then, quiet anew. Jack breathed out deliberately. If those were foe vehicles, they groped forward just as blindly as he did, probing. If friendly, they might shoot first at an unauthorized tanker slinking through the timber. Neither option bore temptation. He fired up the ignition anew, allowed it to idle briefly, then crept onward, lamps dark. The flurry eased slightly, revealing the lane's vague contours. He reached a split, a triad of slim trails branching off. No indicators, no ruts, no guides. He braked once more, grabbed the light, exited the cab. Flakes yielded with a hush underfoot. He surveyed the surroundings. On one trunk, half concealed by rime, a subtle mark. Dim pigment, a marking, a U.S. emblem. Optimism welled within. He chipped at the rind with his blade. Confirmed. The symbol, weathered yet genuine. Dated, but ours. Passage had occurred here. Lately, hard to tell. Still, it signified progress. He selected the central route. Inside the rig again, he veered onto the median trail, pulse racing, grip firm despite the chill. That's when another detail registered. A subtle odor. Scorched lubricant, fumes. Further along, evidence of recent presence or ongoing. He trailed the trace. Distance stretched endlessly, each curve a potential barrier, ambush, or merely emptiness. He overtook derelict wrecks, one capsized in a gully, rotors whirring faintly in the draft, another pocked with impacts, drifts gathering inside. Yet no remains. That emptiness chilled deeper. Jack persisted. The woods started to sparse, and soon, despite the seeming eternity, actually under half an hour, he spotted it. Razor coils, piled barriers, a shallow dugout mounded with powder. He halted gently, and from the gloom, a command rang. "Stop! Challenge word!" Jack's arms flew upward, inhale snagged. He replied firmly, deliberately, "Philadelphia." A beat, then, "Proceed and identify." Jack inched closer, limbs elevated, as a figure rose from the earthwork. U.S. headgear, standard carbine. Easing tension nearly buckled him. The trooper beckoned him through. "You're overdue," he grumbled. "Thought your group was lost for good." Jack denied it. "Solo run, not with a group." That prompted a hush. Then the guard eyed the cans aft. "That the stuff I suspect?" Jack affirmed. "Premium grade headed for the heavies, took a wrong turn." The man let out a soft whistle. "You don't grasp the impact yet." And Jack at last released his breath. He didn't. Truly, not immediately. But that payload had just supplied the final holdout in the zone, and in the next 60 minutes it'd fuel ironclads stalled in the drifts for 48 hours, the shipment that shifted the tide. They advanced. Quickly, the moment Jack's truck pulled up to the improvised American stronghold, troops started hauling away the fuel barrels. Numb hands clutched icy metal grips. Fighters with wind-chapped faces and weary gazes labored in hushed determination. All understood the gravity of the moment. This was the last defensive point before the key crossroads and bridges at Tua Palm, a vital hub that, if captured, would allow German panzers to plunge further into Allied lands over the next 2 days. For 48 hours, this spot had clung on by a thread. The tanks stationed there, primarily Shermans, hadn't budged in 36 hours. Their operators dozed in the drifts nearby, clutching weapons rather than controls, braced for either gasoline or the command to fall back. Nothing had arrived until this delivery. Jack hopped down from the driver's seat, his limbs rigid, his skin chafed by the biting chill and mounting tension. He stepped aside and observed as hoses were hooked up, pumps activated, and motors dormant for almost 2 days, sputtered into action once more. Gradually, the Shermans roared to life. The growl of their power plants shattered the quiet like a storm. Clouds of exhaust billowed from stacks. Turret mechanisms turned. Gunners mounted their stations. A junior officer neared Jack, clutching a notepad with unsteady fingers. "You drove here by yourself?" he inquired. Jack gave a curt nod. The man glanced at the vehicle, then at the armored units now advancing toward combat. "Can't be," he muttered. Yet it was real. It had unfolded precisely when needed. Less than an hour later, fierce armored columns from Kampfgruppe Peiper, one of the fiercest and most relentless forces in Hitler's army, were sighted advancing on the site. They'd already seized Stavelot. Eager for supplies and frantic to punch through, they remained oblivious to the fresh American resupply. The Shermans surged from the tree line, motors screaming, treads grinding through iced earth under their mass. They positioned along the flanks of the highway, established firing traps, and lay in wait. As the Germans approached, anticipating quiet capitulation, they faced a barrage instead. Projectiles erupted from cannon muzzles. Autocannons blazed across the ridges. The foe, caught off guard by the abrupt U.S. counterattack, retreated in disarray. The gasoline Jack transported granted those soldiers maneuverability. It provided protection. It offered survival. Moreover, it withheld from the Germans their greatest necessity, their own reserves. Hitler's ardent offensive hinged on rapid progress. Lacking the element of shock or forward drive, the push would falter. And in faltering, it would crumble. That day marked the onset of its downfall. Experts today concur that this minor clash thwarted Kampfgruppe Peiper from accessing the fuel stores at Stavelot and Spa. Deprived of that vital resource, the German vanguard bogged down amid the flurries. They deserted their machines. They attempted flight by Shanks Mare. Numerous were taken prisoner. Others perished from exposure on the spot. Jack Miller never discharged a firearm. He issued no directives. He scarcely deviated from the logistics paths, and certainly not intentionally. Still, the petroleum he brought at that pivotal instant to that essential location shifted the momentum in a crucial sector of the fight. He bedded down at the base that evening, dozing in his rig's front seat. Come dawn the following day, a commander clasped his hand and shared words etched in his memory. "You've preserved an entire unit," the fellow declared. "It hasn't sunk in for you yet." Jack rarely dwelled on that episode aloud. Post-war, he went back to Pennsylvania, wed, fathered 2 boys, resumed hauling freight, this time sans blizzards, sans shots fired, sans peril of assault. He sought no decorations. He disavowed any heroic mantle. Yet the documents endure. Supplies reached their mark. Armored vehicles got topped off. The front endured, and that altered the course entirely. The unraveling of Hitler's ultimate thrust. By December 19th morning, the Nazi juggernaut was decelerating. It had launched with rage, 200,000 troops exceeding 1,000 tracked behemoths. They hammered into the Ardennes, carving a profound salient in the Allied defenses that christened the campaign. But the blow lacked sustainment, lacked support lines, lacked replenishment. For all the early triumphs, the alarm, the mist, the turmoil, Hitler's closing wager bore a deadly weakness. It relied utterly on plundered petroleum. The German brass recognized this. They'd tallied each kilometer, each liter. Reserves sufficed to propel their armor to Antwerp, but not for the return journey. Their sole chance lay in seizing U.S. storage sites en route, sites such as the one by Stavelot, sites now fortified thanks to one improbable trucker who made it just in time. Absent that petrol, Teutonic heavies began sputtering out. Panzers halted in the powder. Operators forsook them and pressed ahead afoot. In spots, rigs were demolished by their leaders to thwart seizure. By December 27, the crack Kampfgruppe Piper, the tip of the offensive, found itself encircled. Fuel exhausted, provisions gone, hours dwindled. Altogether, they forsook more than 100 panzers and transports. Piper himself. He slipped away on foot with only a few troops at his side. The others fell into enemy hands, perished, or dispersed into the chaos. The ambition to divide the Allied troops had crumbled. At the same time, throughout the line, U.S. defenses grew more resolute. Supplies of gasoline reached their destinations. Cannons roared back to life. Armored vehicles maneuvered into place once more. Airborne units in places like Bastogne, previously isolated, dug in firmly until help could punch through. Even as the conflict dragged on into January, the tide had turned decisively. The Wehrmacht would no longer mount a significant push in Western Europe. Amid the icy hush of the Ardennes woods, the last flicker of Nazi ambition perished with the immobilized panzers. And one factor, modest yet indisputable, played a role: a lone convoy of gasoline that arrived precisely when it counted. Brought not by a high-ranking officer or a tactician, but by an individual with frozen fingers and an unyielding conviction that the task remained vital, even amid bewildering circumstances. That's the element most chronicles overlook, since accounts of conflict typically dwell on banners, diagrams of campaigns, decrees from packs, and pivotal moments. Yet the Ardennes offensive wasn't solely waged by leaders in command centers. It was carried out by kitchen staff, signalers, healers, and haulers of petroleum who pressed on despite every signal urging retreat. Jack Miller belonged to that group. Though his identity doesn't feature in tactical summaries or combat updates, his contribution echoes in the engines that hummed, the weapons that thundered, and the soldiers who survived for future clashes. Occasionally, triumph in warfare doesn't stem from a sweeping assault or a clever feint. It arises when an individual persists in advancing. The overlooked warriors. As the Ardennes campaign wrapped up in late January 1945, over 1 million troops had clashed amid Belgium's woodlands. Nearly 19,000 GIs lost their lives, more than 47,000 suffered injuries, and upwards of 23,000 went missing or were taken prisoner. It marked the bloodiest engagement in U.S. military annals. Yet global memory clings to Bastogne. It honors Patton. It recalls the blockade, the blizzard, the tenacious stand. Scarcely does it evoke the tankers. Even less do people recall the identities of their operators. But every success casts unseen figures, individuals who didn't fire shots yet bore heavy loads, those who didn't advance aggressively but weathered the storm. People absent from spotlights or ceremonial marches, who altered fate through sheer tenacity alone. Jack Miller was among them. Returning home that spring of 1945, he faced no crowds with signs, no journalists, no spotlights. He disembarked in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, shouldering a kit bag and nursing a persistent ache in his right leg from prolonged frost exposure. He embraced his spouse. He cradled his infant boy initially. Then he took up work hauling goods for a building supplies firm. For years he stayed silent about that harsh season, not from embarrassment, but simply because inquiries never came. In his view, it was merely a treacherous haul through a gale. Still, he'd pushed through. That sufficed. Perhaps that's the essence of valor. Not awards, not orations, just a solitary figure opting for the tough path without yielding. Much later, when his grandson probed about the conflict for a class assignment, Jack at last shared the tale. The gasoline, the detour, the confrontation at the ditch. The child, eyes alight with wonder, inquired, "Were you aware you were preserving lives?" Jack merely grinned and replied, "I only knew they were counting on it." Simple as that. No flair, no exaggeration, pure honesty. And such honesty resonates, for conflicts aren't solely claimed by icons. They're secured by everyday folks who arrive on time, honor commitments, navigate vanished routes, and transport vital goods at critical junctures. The unsung troops aren't erased from memory, not if we recall their principles, their burdens, and what they held on to fiercely. In the bleakest hours, Jack wasn't isolated. Countless others like him, repair crews mending motors barehanded in the freeze, chefs heating meals over broken burners, caregivers inching past blasts to aid the hurt, administrators logging inventories amid sobs, formed the vital core of any force, the foundation beneath each success. Thus, in recounting the Ardennes saga, we should honor not merely the officers and terrains, but the haulers navigating obscurity, those who strayed yet persevered. For at times, safeguarding the globe boils down to something straightforward like declining to halt. Jack didn't become a legend by flawlessly executing. He earned it by continuing onward despite errors. That's the enduring quality of his narrative. It's the irony of bravery. At times, the route that rescues all is the detour fate hadn't planned, and occasionally, a mistaken path leads straight to legacy. These days, no monument stands for Jack Miller, no inscription marks that woodland trail. The gasoline barrels have long since rusted away. They're no longer with us. The armored vehicles he worked to preserve have become exhibits in museums. The troops he managed to aid, those who survived, have aged or departed this world. Yet his enduring influence isn't etched into marble but sustained through core values. What about you? Imagine yourself in that frigid taxi, disoriented and terrified. What would your decision be? Would you pull over, head back, or push onward? After all, history doesn't always call for a champion. It just needs a person who won't surrender.